inside the VAB.
Big crane in there too.
Get some good pictures.
Would you like to come on up to the fence? Forget to look up and get dizzy. Okay, folks, if you want to keep coming on in.
What?
Press to take the picture.
This.
Okay.
Having trouble?
Yeah.
Hear that wind? The button right on the end.
Okay.
See the minus sign? Joe, you see the minus sign?
Uh-huh.
In the
That's when you
transfer
push.
file in front of us is the Moss transporter from Ulm, Germany. And this is that mock-up of the future command and service module of Orion. That's going to be on display when Atlantis moves, along with other possible future manned craft that will be going up to private industry. Behind High Bay 3 with the gray doors going up to the roof, 3 and 1 down further is where we would stack shuttles all these years. To get the pieces in there, up by the roof, well, not really showing now, but we have heavy lift cranes that bring the pieces up over the opening called the transom and then stack the spacecraft up on a platform in there and roll it out through the big gray doors. And speaking of shuttles, who'd like to see Atlantis? We also have Gene Wright, who works with the thermal protection system. Not really tiles, but in this case, needle and thread and blanket for children's pride. Come on down and
Here's the Atlantis.
Hi, come on up. You guys can go all the way up to the yellow fence if you want to. This is the first time we've had an orbiter on display like this. As you all probably know, the orbiter Atlantis is only here. They're leaving a week from today for her parade that we're going to have for her as they take her to the new building. Because we can't finish the new building until she's in there so we can build that final wall around her. But the one thing that I want to point out, do you see that gray cone right there on the bottom of the orbiter? Right there you see the yellow and you see that gray cone? That's a special area on the orbiter right there. That's the forwardmost attach point for the external tank. We have 3 spots that we installed the tank on. That's the furthest one. This happens to have the same hole that they're putting the puck in. But this right here is the special blanket that we made for that area. This one was called an arrowhead blanket right here. It took us 3 days to sew it by hand, and we installed it right where that area is. You can kind of see it looks like an arrowhead or a little arrow pointing backward. But it took us 3 days to hand sew this blanket, and in just a matter of seconds, as the external tank kicked off, those bolts that attached the external tank would get kicked up into this blanket, and that's what protected the skin or the tiles on the belly of the orbiter. So it's kind of frustrating, 3 days of work gone in no time, but it was a very, very important blanket for us to make. So I'll get started, and I'll show you some of the neat stuff that we have over here. Let me start passing out some tile that we have. You'll see some of them, here you go, are light, some are a little heavier. We have them in different densities.
Careful, it's so heavy.
But let me point out a couple of things. This tile right here, you'll see a VO70 at the upper left-hand corner. That means this tile was made here at Kennedy Space Center. Everyone thinks we've always made tile out here. We didn't start making them in the Thermal Protection Building, which is just kitty corner across the street. But we started making tile here in about 1990 because the orbiters, of course, were made in Palmdale, California. So they came to us either with the tiles on, or they would send us box loads of tile for us to install. And the other thing I'd like to point out on the tile is we have a 6-digit number. Every single one of our parts were hand stamped. So these first 3 numbers of the 6 tell us where on the orbiter this would go. And this 193 means this is a left-wing Elevon post tile. So when this one flew, if it flew, would be roughly in this area right here. So I will start passing this around. Here we go. But one thing is really, really fascinating, and that's where I come in at. We were aerospace composite techs. We affectionately called each other the SO sisters because there was only 13 of us that did this job on the orbiter. But after the 8th shuttle flight, we were always trying to figure out a way to make the orbiters as light as we could, because the lighter we made the orbiters, the heavier payloads we could carry. So after the 8th shuttle flight, we started flying blankets on the outside. We replaced over 1,900 square feet of tile with these blankets. Now people ask me, is there tile underneath? Tile on top? No, this is the only thermal protection that we had. It's very light. It takes us a lot less time to make than a tile because we have to make a slurry for the tile, dry it, bake it, cut it, bake it again, put the paint on. It takes a long time. These blankets, and I'll pass this around, were stitched on this machine right here. We made 11 different classes or thicknesses. Class 1 was a 1/4 inch thick. Class 11 was 2 inches thick, and as you could probably guess, the thicker the blanket, the heavier the heat flow. So our thick blankets were 2 inches thick, class 11s, weighed 5 pounds when we took them off the machine, and they went into the ohms pod on the very top of it because the heat flow there was 1,200 degrees, thank you. So these blankets were made for areas that were exposed to 700 to 1,200 degrees. Now this is the actual material right here. This is quartz on the outside with fiberglass on the back, and it was stitched in a quartz thread. And in our machine we had 5 gallons of WD-40, which everybody recognizes because it would lubricate the fabric and the needles. And as they were going through the machine, we'd have a spray bottle of WD that we would spray the blankets as they were going through. But I will pass these around. Now again, if you're wondering, how can something like that fly? After we install them, which is this material right here, this is called RTV. Most of our blankets and tile are installed with this. Here we go, I'll pass this around too. Here's a sample too. And right here you go. But anyway, after they're installed, we put 2 coats of ceramic 9-coating paint on them, which makes the fabric just as hard as a brick when it flies. So I'm going to show you some other blankets that we also made. This one flew into space right here. These are called TCS blankets, a thermal control system blanket. And it's a unique fabric that they're made out of. It's polyamide, which is a good fabric. We used to fly these with 10% gold, but it was very expensive. And that was to aid in radiation reduction to the crew. But this polyamide is the exact same thing at considerable less cost. But as a seamstress, anybody who sews, there's 145,000 holes per square yard of this, because as we're stitching these blankets, we get a natural buildup of air. So we go into the vacuum of space, the blankets get compressed, so there has to be a way for the air to escape, or technically these can pop. But what's so cool about these is, they're called multi-layer for a reason. We have 16 layers of a Dacron mesh and a film that's inside each of these blankets, and I'll start passing that around so you can, here you go, see? Now another type of blanket that we also sewed, thank you. This is a little sample that I made. This is exactly what our cargo bay blankets are made out of. Most of you would see this, those silver blankets going around. Those are inside the walls of the orbiter, so you wouldn't see those at all. But this one is probably one of the most photographed blankets because this lines the whole cargo bay. Now this is Beta Cloth, which is a Teflon-coated fiberglass with, again, the polyamide on the back. But what makes this one special is this is what the inside of this one looks like. If you see the astronauts' helmets during a spacewalk and they'll put their visor down and you see like this copper orange color, it's the same thing. This is a film, it's called Solar Shield. This would be stitched right underneath here, and it helps boost the sun reflective heat outside the cargo bay. So I'll pass that around. And here's a couple pictures I took of the cargo bay, because you can see right here, and I'll pass these around too. But this one, you'll see the American flag on this one. We have a blanket that we sew the flag on, and we snap it into place. It's one of the last ones that we sew and put in, so here we go. Now, we did a lot of hand sewing for the shuttle, which I think surprises a lot of people. We have spaces in between the tiles, especially on the belly of the orbiter. So this is what we call a gap filler. This is Nextel fabric. It's got an Inconel film inside that helps it keep its shape. But also this would be installed this way with a tile on either side because this fills the gap in between the tile. That's why it's called a gap filler. So I'll pass that around. Again, the sleeving on the top is all stitched in by hand. And this is also another one that we did by hand. I don't know if you can guess what this is. It's kind of gotten misshapen with handling. We have 44 of these on the orbiter. You look up, you can see the ovals right there. These are thrusters. They start off with us hand sewing, use fabric. Then we'll put the RTB around it, but there's a spring tube inside. Now this will be painted with the gray ceramic paint, and you can see the gray right there. But this is what helps control the direction the shuttle goes, either up or down or sideways. We have them forward, we have them in the back, we have them in the back sides. Also, the astronauts tell us when they fire these off, these sound like a cannon when they go off. It uses a lot of fuel when we steer direction, so we try not to use them. But again, they start off just like that. Now, when I talk about how we want to lighten the orbiter, we used to have tile that covered the cargo bay doors themselves. This is the material that we've been flowing for quite a number of times. You see how flexible this is. When the shuttle's on the ground, we used to have these yellow structures called strongbacks that would hold the doors open because they were so flimsy. But all this is a Nomex felt covered with an elasticized polymer, but this can withstand 700 degrees. And again, its main purpose was to not only protect the cargo bay, but since it's so light, we save tons of weight with just the tile. Now, when I talk about hand sewing, this is me taken a few years ago. I'm inside the main landing gear door, which is that front one. You can't, usually the doors are open, but because we're on that, it's not open. But it took 17 hours of two of us to hand sew thermal barriers inside each of the doors, and even the thermal barriers themselves, which I have some examples inside the glass case, which you couldn't have seen because you guys didn't go that way. Usually the tour takes you past our thermal case. But anyway, it took 17 hours for two of us to install, and this is the thread that we use. I had a lot of people ask me, so I went across the street. Most of our sewing was done with this quartz thread right here. The gap fillers and the blankets are quilted with this thread right here, but the thread that I'm using is a very specialty thread. This one burns at 1200 degrees. It's a Nextel thread, and because it's so fragile, we have to hand sew the parts and hand sew anything to install with this one. Now this way it's pretty strong, but if I knot it, it loses its textile strength, so you can tell, wait, there we go. I can't pull it this way, but if I knot it, it weakens it considerably. So every time we would stitch it, if the thread would break, we would have to start all over again. So it took a long time, but I will pass the thread samples around. Now I have a little story that I tell. Tomorrow I'm 57. Tomorrow's my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And they've arranged, I tell this story, this is inside Discovery. I'm pointing to my little hot pink stitches that I have done with that thread. Before they closed Discovery's door one last time, I asked, could I have a picture so I could show my granddaughters? They're 5 and 7, and I've been sewing since I was 9, and every time they come over, they ask Grandma if we can sew. So I tell them, Grandma now has stitches in the Smithsonian. They have no idea what I'm talking about, but tomorrow they were nice enough that when I go on the tour, they're going to let me take my granddaughters over there tomorrow.
Aww.
So anyway, well, thank you. And that's the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. Hey, what would you like? What's this? Good question. This is what we call a tile coupon. This is basically the same material our tiles are made out of, which is roughly 95% air and 5% silica sand. So what we'll do is we'll put this in a special oven, and as we're waterproofing the tile, we have this gas that waterproofs our tile. It will come in, and so instead of cutting into a tile that's taken us a long time to make, we'll cut this into 4 pieces, and if the inside's discolored, then we know the waterproofing has taken effect in all the tiles. So that's what we use this for. That's a good question. Good question.
Yay!
Now, one other thing I want to point out, because I don't know how much time we have, you'll see the banners up here. That was a tradition that we had. We always talked about a teamwork effort out here. So we would walk behind the banners. Well, first of all, we'd sign our names or messages to the astronauts. We'd walk behind the banner as they brought the orbiter in here to stack. Then the banner would go on the back of the mobile launch platform. Then it would be attached to the fence on the launch pad. So the astronauts would see that. One last thing from us that worked on it out here. One last time before launch. After launch, it's been tradition for us to put them up in here. Now you'll notice that big space right there. That represents our last 3 shuttle flights. All the museums have already laid claim to those. And of course, we have the last one, which is 135. The last shuttle flight was done with Atlantis. So Atlantis is going to her new home in a week. So our banner will be on display, but that will be empty from now on. So anyway, thank you. Thank you, Paul. I guess it's time to go. You guys really need to watch it. Your next stop is on the launch pad or at the pad, and it's very, very
More like the wind pad.
Very windy out there. Be careful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
guess you could say you did a good job and not a so-so job.
Oh. Tell me what she said. That's funny.
She did a good job, not a so-so job.
So job. I haven't heard that one.